Alrighty guys, welcome back to another little video. So, I have been dealing with a very sick puppy dog for a couple of months now, and so I haven't had a lot of time to be working on stuff because I've been so focused spending time with her. But luckily she's doing a little bit better now, so I was hoping to actually be able to get to some video topics. And today I have a fun one. Because I was surfing around eBay the other day and I found some Corsair CX9 water blocks for only $23 shipped to my front door. So I decided to pick one up just to see if it was going to be good and see if it was going to be worth putting inside of Goji. But I thought, this gives me a wonderful opportunity. I'm going to be able to compare an actual legitimate water block from Corsair, which is actually, from my understanding, designed and built by Power, and be able to compare something that is a nice high-end water block and compare it to something like this. Now, this is a very basic Chinese water block, primarily for LGA 1155, 1156, 1150, 1151, and LGA 1366. You can also find these water blocks with a different bracket, which would allow you to connect it to AM3 and FM2+. There is no mounting on these specific water blocks for AM4. So these are just very cheap, very basic water blocks. And these water blocks primarily come with water cooling kits from eBay or Amazon. You can also buy these blocks standalone. To buy one of these blocks only costs about $15 if you just buy the Intel bracket. And so it comes with mounting hardware that allows you to mount it to any basic socket, being, again, 1155, 1156, 1151, as well as LGA 1366. But you do need a special adapter to be able to screw this into 2011, 2011 V3, and 2066, which this water block actually comes with mounting hardware dedicated directly for that. Because the CX9 water block from Corsair is actually designed for an HEDT platform, being like X58, X79, X99. Actually, I don't know if it supports X58, but X79, X99, and X299, as well as AMD Threadripper. So I want to actually pull apart these blocks before I do temperature testing, but I'm going to pull apart these blocks so you guys can see the cold plates, and this one actually has a proper jet plate. And then I'm going to compare them a little bit, and then I'm going to throw them on a test bench. So I've got just a basic 240mm slim rad with two 3-pin fans that are just some white LED fans. And I'm going to be slapping it on my E5 1660. So this is the same equivalent as an i7 3960X. This is one of the hottest CPUs that I own, so I figured that was going to be a perfect CPU for this test. And then I'm just using a very basic graphics card, my HD 7750, as, again, a display adapter, essentially, so we can do some CPU testing. Now, I'm going to get these pulled apart so you guys can see exactly what these are looking like. Okay, so let's check out the very cheap water block. Now, this thing has seen some better days. This is a cold plate that I've used for many side projects, but I have never lapped it. Now, as you guys can see, this thing is a little bit tarnished because of its very heavy use. I have ran, like, Primo Chill View as well as pretty much every opaque coolant you could imagine through this water block. And even though it is slightly tarnished, it still works perfectly fine. As well as the fact that the back was a little bit tarnished, but with a little bit of scrubbing with some Scotch-Brite, it has gained back its luster. But these water blocks are, as you guys can tell, pretty cheaply built. You've got your basic cold plate that is milled out of a single piece of copper with micro fins in them, although these micro fins are not exactly micro. You can very much see a difference where you can very much see like the individual fins inside of there, and they're just little square blocks. So it does work very well, but it is not an ideal solution, and there is no jet plate. You have essentially the coolant comes in, because both sides are the same, the coolant comes in, and then it just hits these and then goes to the other side. You also might notice that little bit of missing spot right there. That is how I got it when it came from wherever it came from. I don't remember if I got this one on eBay or Amazon or what I got it with, but this cold plate was slightly damaged. Even though I've had no issues with it, technically that would hurt efficiency by like 0.001%. And frankly, it's not a big deal, but it's quality control things like that that really are kind of unfortunate. But essentially the way this block goes together, see if I can move it without losing all my screws, you've got the metal bracket, you've got the top plate, which is acrylic in this case. You can also get this in a palm or an acetal version. All right, I think it's either palm or acetal. I think it's palm, but it says directly on the listing for the item. But this is an acrylic top one. So it goes acrylic top, and then you put the metal bracket over top of it, if I can put it on straight. And then you've got your O-ring, and this goes over the top of it, and you screw it in from the top with 4 little, these are hex heads. And so, essentially, it is just held together by pressure, and then it is mounted down with the screw kit that it actually comes with. And again, you would need to, if you wanted to use this for 2011 or 2066, which is what I do, you need to have a adapter plate, or not an adapter plate, some adapter screws, but I'll be pulling those out when I actually mount the water block. So let me actually pull apart the Corsair block, because there's a lot more to this one, and then we can actually start comparing and contrasting them, and then get into the actual thermal testing. Okay, so now I've got the Corsair water block kind of pulled apart. As you guys can see, this one is actually a little bit more complex because it actually has a jet plate. So there is a very clear in and a very clear out. Now, this stuff is not actually acrylic. This is an injection molded nylon, from my understanding. So from my understanding, the quality of this is supposed to be really good. Like, it's never actually going to crack or break. Now, I don't know about that one. I'm kind of skeptical, but from my understanding, Corsair, in collaboration with Bits Power, designed these water blocks to be as robust and rugged as possible. It has a full aluminum top plate, and like I said, fully injection molded nylon. You can actually remove this metal plate and remove the nylon from it, but I just left it in there because I didn't think it was necessary to pull it apart. But next, we've got the cold plate. Now, this one, again, you can tell, is quite a bit more thought out. This is a piece of, I believe, nickel-coated copper, and it is a large cold plate. And then keeping the cold plate, or keeping everything inside the water block, is an O-ring, as expected. And then there's also this little plate right here that goes over the top of the fins to actually spread the water out evenly from both sides. So instead of the water only going from one side and kind of creating only like a half cooling system, it is forcing it down on both sides, so then it should, in theory, cool better. Now, this cold plate, this cold plate is freaking massive. Like, let me compare these two for you. This is the size of the cheapo copper water block versus the Corsair block. Now, that is a very substantial difference in just the size of the cold plate. Now, I know you only really need cooling over the chiplet dies itself. You don't even necessarily need to have the entire cold plate covered, but that doesn't change the fact that for using it on an HEDT platform, for something like a 6950X or a 6900K or a 5950X or 5960X, you want to actually have substantial cooling over the entire die. And this kind of like grooved, kind of like fin stack, inside of this water block is barely the size of the actual IHS of an LGA 2011 CPU. Now, again, I know that this comparison between these two is not a fair comparison because they don't even sell these directly with the mounting hardware to go onto an HEDT platform. But me being me, knowing that I can simply screw it on, I have been using these for all of my water cooling and overclocking endeavors, especially on, on X79 and X99. Now, I have never had an issue with using these water blocks. Yes, they do get tarnished over time, but a little bit of TLC can actually clean that up. Like I cleaned up the backside, I simply just didn't care enough to clean up the front. But is it really worth going to an actual HEDT like caliber water block for just basic daily driving tasks? Remember, a water block identical to this is inside of Goji right now, keeping my 5820K at 4.5 gigahertz. Absolutely cool at about 40 degrees Celsius under a gaming load. So yeah, I really am kind of curious. Again, I predict that these water blocks, I think the Corsair block is definitely going to perform better right out of the gate, but then once the coolant temperature equalizes, I've got a good feeling that it's really not going to matter which block you use, that the Corsair block will keep it a little bit more consistent, but the Chinese water block will also be sufficient enough for cooling. And you also might remember when I had trouble putting this water block on that Gigabyte motherboard, it wasn't actually properly mounted down, but I did figure out the problem, and so now I can mount that down to the Gigabyte water block without any issue. Or the Gigabyte motherboard, sorry. But yeah, that's about all I got for right now, so let's actually get into some thermal testing and see if my prediction was correct, or if my prediction just shows that I am an absolute idiot and know nothing about what I am doing. Alright, and to keep the test consistent, I'm going to be using MX6 on both of the applications. I'm going to be using the same amount on both of the applications, and trying to get the same mounting pressure on both CPU water blocks to make it as fair as possible. Alright, so I got the test bench set up, all ready to go, and this is actually the next day. I let this thing cool off overnight so I could give you actual accurate idle temps and everything. Just kick it on, and I will boot into the BIOS and we can get a BIOS temperature reading. Alright, so initial boot into BIOS, the CPU is at 37 degrees Celsius. We are at 4.6 gigahertz at 1.38 volts, even though the CPU does not need that much voltage. Let's get into Windows and start running some stress tests. Alright, so just idling on the desktop, pulling up hardware info 64. We are sitting here in the low 30s, high 20s on some cores, and then there was just one core sitting at 40 degrees there for a second. But yeah, it looks like all around high 20s, low 30s, sitting here idle at the desktop. That's actually really impressive. That's really impressive. Alright, I'm going to load up some Cinebench R15. Hit this thing with a workload and see what temperatures we get. Whoop, wrong one. That one. Yeah, it looks like we're spiking into the high 40s, low 50s. At a seriously spicy overclock, that's really impressive. Yeah, and we're kind of teetering off at low 50 degrees. Okay, so throughout a Cinebench R15 test, we were hitting low 50s. Now that's just going to be a short-term test. I'm going to run 3D Mark Firestrike physics test on a loop and check temperature. So I will do that after 15 minutes, or I will come back after 15 minutes and I will show you guys what the thermals are looking like. Alrighty guys, I just went and got some lunch. I did put a fan on the VRM because it was getting really toasty. But the test has been running for about 34 minutes, and I think we've probably equalized, and it looks like some of our hottest cores hit like 63 degrees C, but primarily stuck around the high 50s, low 60s, which is really surprising because I've been running it a continuous physics test from 3D Mark Firestrike, and that is not an easy test to run. Like, the CPU package power draw is supposedly running at about 150 watts. So being the fact that this thing is keeping it at 60 degrees Celsius when it is literally pushed pretty much to the maximum of what it's capable of, that is pretty impressive. So let me get the water block swapped out and let the radiator really good and cool down, and then I can move over to testing out the cheap Chinese knockoff water block. Okay, now it is time for the janky water block. So the way that I actually mount these to LGA 2011 is that I use these adapter screws that actually come with Chinese motherboards, as well as these adapter plates for 2011. And then I take the spring from the original water block kit, and then I take one of the washers from the original water block kit and just put it over like this. So you've got the screw, then the spring, then the washer. Oop, if I can do it one-handed. There we go, so like that. And then you just screw it right on down, right onto the mounting holes, which I cannot do one-handed, by the way. So I'm going to get this mounted up real quick, and then we can get into BIOS boot up. Okay, so I just booted into the BIOS, and as you can see, we are idling at 48 degrees Celsius. Good grief. That is using the same thermal paste as the Corsair water block? I was not expecting it to be that bad. Let's just boot into Windows and see what it is idling at Windows. So then, on first startup and initial test, once we actually start idling on the homepage, it looks like we're sitting in the mid-30s to high 30s. Yeah, Core 2 is definitely getting more work done than the other cores, but it's toasty. That is, if I'm remembering correctly, that's a little bit above what the Corsair water block was. So let's pull up Cinebench R15. Hit it with a CPU test. Let's see. We are sitting... actually, high 50s, low 60s. Yeah, high 50s, low 60s. Yeah, some of our cores are creeping up into the mid 60s. Yeah, that's not terrible, actually. Yeah, that's really not terrible, actually. Okay, I'm going to load up 3D Mark Firestrike, and I'm going to get the Firestrike test running, and then we can talk about what we learned today. Alright, so we have had this test running for only about 10 minutes, but I actually had the test crash on me once because I realized that I may have blocked one of the fans. But as you guys can see, we are sitting in the high 50s to mid 60s. Now, this is not as good as the Corsair water block, but you know, it's not actually terrible. I mean, we're peaking in the 60s, so it's definitely hotter, but it's not something I wouldn't be comfortable with running. I mean, remember, this is just a very cheap water block hooked up to a thin 240mm radiator. This thing is absolutely clocked out the wazoo, and it's taking 150 watts constantly from the socket, where it peaked at 162. So, yeah, this thing is, again, definitely not performing as well as the Corsair block, but it's not performing terribly at all. And in fact, I I'm more than comfortable with running something like this. Which is why I, again, am using these water blocks in many of my projects, including Goji. So, yeah, I guess we can talk about a conclusion.
Okay, guys, now that I'm sitting in front of my computer, it's actually about 4 days later. I apologize that it's taken me so long to finish up this video. My poor puppy is still pretty sick. Not pretty sick, she's extremely sick. And so I have been focusing a lot more of my time on her than I have on making this video, so I wanted to wrap up this video by giving you guys a few of my thoughts when it comes to comparing a high-end, expensive water block versus a far cheaper water block. So, all in all, the cheap water block is only about $22 when you buy the water block and the mounting hardware. Being able to purchase it brand new off of Amazon for only about $22 is really not a bad deal, especially being the fact that it really can hold its own. I have been using these water blocks in all of my water cooling projects since the very beginning, because the water blocks that I had originally got were actually soldered closed, and I made the dumb decision of running Primo Chill View through them and completely clogging them. And when it comes to these cheap water blocks, actually being able to fully assemble them and disassemble them and change things if they need to be changed has been an absolute treat. Again, these water blocks are incredibly low cost, but they are incredibly good performers. On contrast, the Corsair water block, the CX9, is a far better designed, far better manufactured, far better block, but with that better, you are paying a significantly higher price. The Corsair water block retails for, I believe, $59.99 or $69.99. I'll put it up on screen so you guys can actually see. That water block is a fantastic, beautiful piece of engineering, and I'm pretty sure that Corsair has made significant amounts of money by selling that water block, because they sell it for cheaper than what an EK water block is, but it will still perform on par with what an EK block would, even EK's higher end water blocks. And so, frankly, the Corsair water block is fantastic, but is that water block really worth paying a significant premium over a cheap block? Well, that depends. If you're looking for something that is just an entry-level water cooling block and you just want to get something that's going to work, I could recommend the cheap water block all day, every day. But if you want to build something that's going to have a little bit more customizability to it, something that's actually going to have built-in RGB lighting, something that's going to actually last you probably significantly longer than what one of these El Cheapo Chinese blocks would, I could definitely recommend the Corsair block. Another thing, these cheap water blocks, to get the best performance out of them, you need to lap the water block. That's not something you need to do with the Corsair block. And if that's something that kind of interests you and you can have fun doing that kind of stuff like I do, then again, buying something like the lower cost block is, again, still a very good value, because you can extract pretty much the same performance out of it, but you do have to put in the extra legwork. Just another piece of food for thought. Overall, I am definitely impressed with what Corsair was able to achieve with this water block, especially being the fact that this was one of their first forays into water cooling, besides their AIOs, which are all designed by Asetek. Corsair really did do a good job, and I am going to be switching Goji over to one of these Corsair water blocks because I frankly have just fallen in love with it. The design is great, the performance is awesome, and also being the fact that the metal piece is removable, I can take that and I can customize it. So I could paint it, or I could plasti dip it, or I could hydro dip it. I've got some plans in the future to mess around with hydro dipping. Yeah, it's one of those items that I can definitely get behind and have some fun with because it is such a high quality block. But I honestly think that I've probably been talking way too much here, so I'll see you guys later. Wish me luck with my dog, and as always, peace.